Millionaire CEO finds single father and twins 6 years after abandoning them, and breaks down in tears. Just before we begin, your presence means a lot. Say hi and share where you're tuning in from, only if you want to. The morning Ethan Calloway decided to walk instead of taking a cab. He told himself it was because the weather was too good to waste. 62 degrees in late October, the kind of crisp Manhattan air that made you feel like anything was still possible. He had his leather portfolio under one arm and his coffee in the other. Black, no sugar. And he was already running 4 minutes late to meet the contractor at the Aurelius. He had been late to 3 meetings this week. Rachel said it was because he was distracted. He had told her he was just busy. They both knew which one was true. He almost didn't see her. She was standing just outside the restaurant's brass-framed entrance, talking on her phone with that same posture he had memorized a lifetime ago. Back perfectly straight. Free hand pressed flat against her collarbone, the way she always did when a conversation was costing her more than she wanted to show. Dark hair cut sharper than he remembered, cheekbones more defined, dressed in a charcoal coat that probably cost more than his first car. She looked like someone who had built exactly the life she intended to build. His feet stopped before his brain told them to. Victoria. She turned at the exact wrong moment, or the exact right one. Their eyes met across 6 feet of sidewalk and 6 years of silence, and for a single suspended breath, neither of them moved. The city continued around them. A bus hissed past. A delivery bike weaved between taxis. 2 men in suits talked loudly about someone's quarterly projections, and the 2 of them stood at the center of all of it like stones in a river, perfectly still. Then her assistant said something in her ear, and the moment cracked. "I have to call you back." Her voice, still that voice, low and controlled even when her face said something different. She lowered the phone slowly like she was buying time. "Ethan." "Victoria." He said her name like he was testing whether it still fit in his mouth. It did. That was the problem. She looked at the portfolio under his arm, then at the entrance behind her, and he watched her put it together. "You're the architect," she said. "For the renovation. And you're apparently having lunch here." He managed something close to a neutral expression. "My assistant made the reservation. Mine made mine." A pause, thin as paper. "I didn't know." "Neither did I." They stood there for a moment that was 3 seconds long and about 6 years deep. And the city moved around them like it always had. Indifferent, relentless, brilliant. A cab honked 2 blocks south. Someone's shopping bag rustled against the wind. The smell of roasted chestnuts drifted over from the cart on the corner, the same cart that had been on that corner since before either of them could afford to eat at a place like the Aurelius. Ethan was the one who spoke first. He always had been. "How are you?" It was such a small question for such an enormous situation that she almost smiled. Almost. She stopped. Started again. "I don't know how to answer that honestly." "You never used to have that problem." Something flickered in her expression. Pain, maybe. Or recognition. Or both things that had grown into each other over years until they were indistinguishable. "People change." "They do," he agreed. He shifted the portfolio to his other arm. "I have a site walk at 9:30. I should go in." "Of course." She stepped aside, giving him room to pass. And he noticed she kept her eyes forward, not looking at him as he moved past. The same way you don't look directly at something that might break you if you stare too long. He paused at the door. He shouldn't. He absolutely should not. "The girls are good," he said, without turning around. "In case you were wondering." He heard her breath catch. Just barely. Just enough. "I'm glad," she whispered. He pushed open the door and walked into the cool, amber-lit interior of the Aurelius, and he did not let himself look back. He had learned, slowly, painfully, over 1,000 small moments, that looking back was how you lost the ground you'd fought so hard to stand on. But his hands were not quite steady as he unrolled the architectural drawings on the bar. Ethan Marcus Calloway had not been the man he was now when Victoria Hartwell left him. 6 years ago he had been 29, talented, yes, hungry, yes, but still the kind of man who believed that love was the most reliable foundation you could build anything on. He had grown up in Dayton, Ohio, the second of three sons, in a house where his father fixed other people's roofs and his mother kept the accounts, and nobody talked much about feelings, but everybody showed up. He had shown up his whole life. He met Victoria at a firm dinner in 2017, the kind of networking event where everyone was performing a version of themselves they hoped would eventually become real. She had been standing near the window with a glass of Sancerre she wasn't drinking, listening to a senior partner explain something she clearly already knew, and he had walked over and said, "You look like you're being very polite right now." She had looked at him with those dark eyes and said, "I've been being polite for 26 years, I'm getting tired." He had laughed and she had smiled, and that was that. They dated for 8 months before he met her mother, a formidable woman named Eleanor who wore her wealth quietly and watched him like she was reading a document. They were together for 2 years when Victoria got pregnant. Not planned, not unplanned, just one of those moments the universe decides for you. He had been terrified and elated in equal measure. He had gotten down on one knee on a Tuesday night in their apartment kitchen, with a ring he'd saved 4 months for and sauce on his shirt from the dinner he'd been making, and she had said yes before he finished the question. Then she was gone. No argument. No warning. No note that made any real sense. Just a message that said, "I can't do this. I'm sorry. Please don't look for me." He had looked anyway. Of course he had. But she had vanished with a precision that, looking back, spoke of planning. Her number changed. Her office gave him nothing. Eleanor, cool, careful Eleanor, met him at a coffee shop 2 weeks later and said only, "She made her choice, Ethan. Let her make it." He had driven home from that coffee shop in silence and sat in the parking garage of his building for 20 minutes before he could make himself go upstairs. He had been left with a 2-bedroom apartment, an unfinished nursery, and the knowledge that somewhere out there, the woman who had said yes to him on a Tuesday night was carrying his children. Twins. He had found out from a mutual friend, 3 months after she left. Twin girls, born in February, healthy, both of them. He had sat with that information for a long time. He had hired a lawyer, not to take them from her. He had been very clear about that, but to know. To be present, in whatever form she would allow. She had allowed everything. The custody arrangement arrived through attorneys, signed without contest. Full physical custody to Ethan. Visitation rights available to Victoria. Open and unconditional. Child support rejected by Ethan's own attorney on his explicit instruction. He didn't want her money. He never had. He had brought Lily and Luna home from the hospital on a gray February morning, one in each arm, and he had stood in the doorway of the apartment and understood for the first time what it meant to be entirely responsible for another person's entire world. 2 other people's worlds, as it happened. His sister Rachel had moved in for the first 6 months. His mother had flown in every other month for the first 2 years. His firm had given him a modified schedule that he had gradually rebuilt into something extraordinary, because necessity has a way of doing that, of turning the thing you thought would break you into the engine that drives you forward. Lily and Luna were 6 now, 1st grade. Lily was loud and fearless, and had once negotiated her bedtime back by 25 minutes, using a hand-drawn chart she had titled in crayon, "Why 9 o'clock is unfair, is." Luna was quiet and watchful, and had a habit of writing things down in small notebooks she kept in various locations around the apartment. Both of them had Victoria's cheekbones and his stubborn streak, and they were the best thing in his life by such a wide margin that the second best thing, his work, which he genuinely loved, wasn't even close. The contractor, a solid man named Dave Okafor, found him at the bar with the drawings, and they spent 45 minutes walking the Aurelius together. The bones of the place were extraordinary, pre-war plasterwork and original brass fixtures, and what the owners wanted was a renovation that honored all of that, while making the space feel alive and warm again, like a room that remembered it had once been loved. Ethan loved this kind of work, finding what a building was trying to say and helping it say it better. He was measuring a window alcove when his phone buzzed. Rachel's message read, "Luna asked me this morning who Richard Cole is. Do you know why she'd have that name?" He stared at the message for a long moment. Richard Cole, a name he had not said out loud in years, a name that lived at the back of his mind like a splinter he had never quite been able to reach. Present, persistent, never quite painful enough on any single day to force him to go looking for it, but always there. Always. He typed back, "I'll explain tonight. Don't make a big deal of it with her." He pocketed the phone and went back to his measurements. But the number he wrote down was wrong, and he had to do it twice. Rachel Calloway had a gift for making hard things look easy, and an equally impressive gift for making easy things look exactly as complicated as they actually were. She was 34, 3 years younger than Ethan, and had moved from Columbus to New York not because of him. She was very clear about this, but because New York was where her graphic design clients were, and it happened to be convenient that her brother needed someone to collect the twins from school on days when his job took him uptown. She had not planned to become the scaffolding of his family. She had just kept showing up, and one day she looked around and realized she was load-bearing. She didn't mind. Not really. Lily called her Rah-Rah, and Luna called her Aunt Rachel with the kind of grave formality that made adults want to laugh and also take her completely seriously. And both of those things meant the world to Rachel in ways she didn't always say out loud. But she minded about this. She was sitting at the kitchen table when Ethan came home at 6:15, his jacket over his arm, and the specific look on his face that she had learned to read as something happened today and I'm still deciding how to feel about it. Luna was at the table too, doing her homework with focused intensity, her small notebook open beside her math worksheet. Lily was in the living room doing something that involved a jump rope and a significant amount of noise that stopped, resumed, stopped again, like punctuation in a sentence no one had written. Rachel waited until Lily's noise reached a crescendo, and then subsided before she said quietly, "She asked me when I picked them up, out of nowhere. Rah-Rah, do you know a man named Richard Cole?" Ethan set his jacket on the back of a chair. "What did you say?" "I said I didn't know him personally." "Which is technically true." She paused. "Where did she get that name?" "I don't know yet." He looked at his daughter, who was adding numbers with the quiet diligence she brought to everything, and his expression did something complicated. "Luna, buddy." Luna looked up. 6 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's way of looking at you like she was reading the page behind the page. "Hi, Dad. Rah-Rah told me you asked about someone named Richard Cole today." Luna nodded, unsurprised that this had circled back. She reached for her notebook, opened it to a page near the middle, and turned it so Ethan could see. In her careful first-grade handwriting, the letters still slightly uneven but deliberate, she had written, "Richard Cole," and underneath it, in smaller letters, Dad said his name when Uncle Pete was visiting. He sounded sad. Ethan was very still. "When did Uncle Pete visit?" he asked, keeping his voice even. "A long time ago," Luna said. "When me and Lily had the bunk bed still. You were on the phone in the kitchen, but the door was open." She looked at him with that precise, careful gaze. "You said Richard Cole ruined my life and I still don't know how. I wrote it down because you sounded really sad and I wanted to remember it in case it was important." Rachel looked at her brother. Her brother looked at his daughter. "Why did you want to remember it?" he asked. Luna considered this with the seriousness she gave to all real questions. "Because important sad things are different from regular sad things," she said. "Important sad things have reasons. I thought maybe if I found the reason, the sad part would make more sense." The silence in the kitchen was the kind that has weight to it. Ethan pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his daughter's careful handwriting in her small notebook, and Rachel watched something move through him. Not grief, exactly. More like the recognition of something you had been carrying so long you had forgotten it was there. Something that had become part of the shape of you. "You don't need to find reasons for my sad things," he said finally. "That's my job, not yours." "But you haven't found it yet," Luna said, with the devastating logic of a 6-year-old. Ethan laughed. It was a short sound, surprised out of him. "No," he said. "I guess I haven't." He closed the notebook gently and slid it back to her. "Richard Cole is someone who was part of my life a long time ago, before you and Lily were born. He wasn't a good person, but he's not part of our life now, so you don't have to worry about him." Luna absorbed this with the patience of someone who has learned that adults sometimes give you half an answer and call it a full one. Was he part of why Mom left? The question landed like a stone dropped in still water, spreading outward, touching everything. Ethan and Rachel both went very still. Lily had stopped jumping rope somewhere in the last 30 seconds, and the apartment was quiet in a way that made the question feel even larger than it already was. "I don't know," Ethan said. And that, Rachel realized, was entirely true. He genuinely didn't know. He had never known. That was the thing that had eaten at him for 6 years, beneath everything else. Not just the leaving, but the inexplicable quality of it, the way it hadn't fit the person he had known. "Why do you ask?" "Because I wrote his name in the same notebook as some other things," Luna said simply. "And sometimes things in the same notebook turn out to be connected." She went back to her math worksheet. Rachel stood up and went to the stove in the way that people go to stoves when they need to do something with their hands. Ethan stayed at the table watching his daughter add numbers with steady concentration, and did not say anything else for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car alarm sounded briefly outside, and then stopped. Lily appeared in the doorway, looked at the two adults with the expert social radar of a 6-year-old who can detect tension without being able to name it, and went back to the living room without a word. Later, after the girls were in bed, Luna in her spot by the window where she liked to watch the street before she fell asleep, Lily already deeply unconscious in the way only children and golden retrievers can truly manage. Rachel brought Ethan a cup of tea he hadn't asked for, and sat across from him at the cleared kitchen table. "She saw Victoria today," he said before Rachel could speak. "You did," Rachel corrected. "She saw Victoria today. The girls don't know." He wrapped his hands around the mug. "She was at the Aurelius. The renovation. She didn't know I was the architect. I didn't know it was her restaurant." "What happened?" "Nothing." 45 seconds on the sidewalk. He was quiet for a moment. "She looked like herself. Older, but herself." Rachel chose her words with the care she had developed over 6 years of being the person Ethan talked to when he needed to think out loud. "And how are you?" "I'm fine." "Ethan, I'm—" He stopped. "Set the mug down. I don't know what I am. I thought I was done with that particular chapter. I have been done with it, for a long time. I rebuilt everything. I built things I didn't even know I could build. And then 45 seconds on a sidewalk and it turns out you can be done with something and it can still matter. Having feelings about it doesn't mean you're not done with it." "I told her the girls were good," he said. "Before I walked away, I said, 'The girls are good in case you were wondering.' Just left that there." He exhaled. "I don't know why I said it." "Because it was true," Rachel said. "And because you wanted her to know it." He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. "She's still their mother," Rachel said gently. "I know that. They're going to ask someday, more than Luna already is. I know that too." He picked up the mug again. I need to know why, Rachel, before anything else. I have never needed anything to make sense as much as I need that one thing. 6 years and I still don't understand how a person who loved me the way she loved me could just disappear." Outside, the city went on being the city. Somewhere downtown, in a high-floor apartment with park views, Victoria Hartwell sat at her desk and stared at a document she had been pretending to read for an hour, thinking about 45 seconds on a sidewalk and a voice that said, "The girls are good," like it was both a kindness and a wall. She opened her laptop, closed it, opened it again. She typed 2 words into the search bar: Ethan Calloway. His firm's website appeared first. Clean design, confident presentation. The work was extraordinary. Hotels, restaurants, cultural spaces. A renovation in the West Village written up in Architectural Digest. A community center in the Bronx that had won a national award. She clicked through the portfolio for a long time, looking at spaces he had made beautiful, and tried not to think about the nursery he had painted by himself in their old apartment, 2 months before she disappeared. She had been 4 months pregnant. He had gotten yellow paint on his left ear and hadn't noticed until she laughed and pointed, and he had laughed too, and she had thought, in exactly that moment, "This is what I want my whole life to look like." She closed the laptop. Then she called her attorney, Frank Delgado, who answered on the second ring despite the hour. "I need to know," she said. If what Richard showed me 6 years ago could have been fabricated. All of it. Any of it. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. Find out, Frank. Whatever it costs. On the other end, there was a pause that told her he had been waiting for this call for some time. The Hartwell Industries building occupied the corner of 6th Avenue and 51st Street, 44 floors of glass and steel that Victoria's grandfather had commissioned in 1987, and that the financial press still occasionally referenced as one of the most distinctive pieces of corporate architecture in Midtown. The lobby featured a wall of moving water that her grandmother had insisted upon. Power should be beautiful, Eleanor Hartwell had said, or what is the point of it? The executive floor, the 44th, had views that on clear days stretched all the way to New Jersey. Victoria had worked in this building since she was 22 years old. First as a junior analyst, then as a project manager, then through a series of accelerations that the business press liked to call meteoric, and that she knew had been the result of 18-hour days, relentless preparation, and a refusal that bordered on pathological to accept that any problem was fundamentally unsolvable. She had become CEO at 31, youngest in the company's history, the first woman. She had not done it alone. She had known that at the time. She had known that Richard Cole, her mother's godfather, the man who had guided her career for 2 decades with what she had believed was pure mentorship, had smoothed paths and opened doors that would have taken her 10 years to accumulate independently. She had been grateful. She understood now with the clarity that only Frank Delgado's preliminary phone call could produce, entirely in his debt. And he had known precisely how to spend that. She was thinking about all of this on Thursday morning, 2 days after the Aurelius sitting across from her head of legal, Caroline Webb, a sharp and measured woman whose professional composure Victoria had always admired and was now examining with entirely new eyes. The deposition schedule for the Meridian acquisition is finalized, Caroline said, moving through her prepared materials with practiced efficiency. We'll need you in Chicago on the 14th. I want to revisit the 2018 audit, Victoria said. Caroline looked up from her binder. The internal audit? From Q3? The full financial review, the one Richard commissioned from the outside firm. Victoria kept her voice neutral, precise. I want the raw data. Not the summary report, the working files, the auditor's notes, all primary materials produced during the engagement. A pause, controlled, almost imperceptible. That is a substantial amount of material. I'm aware. I'd like it by Friday. Caroline made a note. Her expression did not change, and that itself was the thing Victoria filed away with care, because it should have. Even a professional with Caroline's composure should have registered some flicker of surprise at the scope and specificity of the request. The absence of that flicker was its own kind of information. After the meeting, Victoria stood at the window for a long time, looking south toward the Hudson, watching a container ship move with improbable slowness across the gray water. She had built this company. Whatever Richard had arranged in the background, the decisions, the products, the partnerships, the culture, the values, those had been hers. She had not been a proxy. She had been a person who trusted the wrong man for reasons that had felt, at the time, entirely reasonable, and the distinction mattered to her enormously even now, even as the ground beneath her was beginning to feel less certain than it had on Monday morning. But none of that changed what she had done to Ethan, or to the girls. She thought about Lily and Luna every day. She had from the beginning, from the first night in the hotel room where she had sat with the signed custody papers on the bed beside her, and understood fully the size of what she had surrendered. She had told herself they were better off. That Ethan, stable, present, fundamentally decent Ethan, who showed up for everything, was worth more to 2 small children than a mother who lived in the orbit of a man like Richard Cole. She had told herself this so many times, across so many quiet nights, that it had almost solidified into something she genuinely believed. Almost. She had watched them from a distance when she allowed herself to. Ethan posted photographs occasionally, birthdays, school events, ordinary moments accumulating into a life she observed from the outside, and she had studied each one with the careful attention of someone learning a language they are not permitted to speak. She had watched Lily become louder and funnier in each frame, more fearless, more entirely herself. She had watched Luna grow quieter and more interior, always slightly removed from the surrounding noise, and she had recognized something in that quality so immediately and painfully that she had once had to close her laptop and go stand in the kitchen for a long time, until the feeling became something she could carry again. She had sent the dresses every birthday without a name. 2 dresses, one pink, one yellow, because she had learned their preferences from photographs the same way she had learned everything else about her daughters, from a careful distance, with no right to the knowledge. She was not under any illusions about what that made her. Her phone buzzed. Frank Delgado. Preliminary findings are significant. Need to meet in person. Today, if possible. She was in his office on Park Avenue by 2 o'clock. Frank was 61, silver-haired, and had the kind of face that had heard everything at least twice and remained constitutionally unshockable. He was also incapable of softening news that needed to be delivered without softening. This was why she had paid him for 20 years, and why she trusted him with things she told no one else. "The documents Richard presented to you," he said, opening a folder on the desk between them. "The photographs. The financial records, the transcripts of supposed conversations." "Yes. I had a digital forensics specialist review the copies you retained before signing. She found metadata inconsistencies in 3 key documents, timestamps that do not align with the dates indicated on the face of the documents. File creation records suggesting that at minimum 2 of the transcripts were produced within 48 hours of when Richard presented them to you." He looked at her steadily. "The photographs are genuine, but their context is fabricated. Ethan Calloway was present at those locations. He was there on legitimate professional business." The office was very quiet. "He was never an informant," Victoria said. Not a question. She had known this somewhere beneath the fear. In the part of herself she had chosen not to consult because consulting it would have cost her everything Richard was threatening. She had chosen not to know. That was the truth she would have to live inside for the rest of her life. "There is no credible evidence he was ever anything other than what he represented himself to be," Frank said. "An architect. A man who loved you. The father of your daughters." She sat with this for a full minute. The weight of 6 years descended all at once, and she let it, feeling it fully, without managing it, without translating it immediately into the next action she needed to take. "Why did Richard need this?" she asked. "Why specifically Ethan? That's the question I've been sitting with. I think I know." She pressed her palms flat on the armrests. "Ethan wasn't the target, I was. If I had him, if I had a family, a person who was entirely mine and not Richard's, I would have been harder to control. I would have had someone in my corner who didn't owe Richard anything. Someone who would have noticed what I was too close to see." She paused. "I would have asked different questions. I would have looked at different things. Richard couldn't afford that." Frank was quiet for a moment. Then, "Victoria, the SEC has opened a preliminary inquiry into Hartwell Industries' financial activities over the past decade. Nothing is public yet. The inquiry is focused on Richard Cole specifically, offshore structures, a pattern of transactions that required authorization at the executive level." He looked at her directly. "You need to get ahead of this. Full cooperation. Your own voluntary disclosure before they formally approach the company." "I will. And if you can find anything that directly ties the fabricated documents to Richard, anything that places their creation in his hands, that materially changes your position. It establishes you as a victim of the same scheme, not a participant." "I'll find it," she said. She stood, gathered her coat, and moved toward the door. Then she stopped. "Frank, the person who opened the SEC inquiry, the source." She turned back. "Do you have any indication who it is?" He hesitated 1 second. "Not yet, but whoever it is has access to highly specific documentation from Richard Cole's personal accounts and private communications, the kind of access that requires decades of proximity." On the elevator down to Park Avenue, she thought about Richard's personal accountant, a quiet, meticulous man named Gerald Marsh, who had worked for Richard Cole for 30 years and who knew where every number had been moved and why. She thought about last year's company holiday dinner, and the way Gerald had looked at her across the crowded room with an expression she had filed away without examining, an expression she could now, with everything Frank had just told her, read with perfect clarity. It had been an apology, offered in advance, from a man who had not yet found the courage to act, but who already knew that one day he would have to. She walked out onto Park Avenue and stood in the October cold, the city loud and indifferent around her. She thought about a small notebook with careful handwriting. She thought about a 6-year-old girl who had looked at her father and said with complete certainty, "Sometimes things in the same notebook turn out to be connected." She had spent 6 years believing that leaving had been the bravest thing she had ever done. She understood now, standing in the wind, that it had been the most cowardly, and that the genuinely brave thing, the terrifying, necessary, overdue brave thing, was still ahead of her, waiting. The renovation of the Aurelius was scheduled to take 16 weeks. Ethan had managed more complex projects in less time, but the Aurelius was particular, the kind of building that required conversation rather than instruction, a space that pushed back when you tried to impose something on it rather than draw out what was already there. He had learned to love that kind of resistance. It was honest. He was on site every Tuesday and Thursday, and it was on the second Thursday, 12 days after the sidewalk, that he saw Victoria again. She came through the side entrance, the one that led directly to the private dining room where the owners held their weekly management meetings. She was with 2 other people, a man Ethan didn't recognize and a woman he placed after a moment as the restaurant's general manager. She was talking, not looking toward the main floor where his team was working, and she might have moved straight through without seeing him at all, except that Luna had sent him a voice message that morning, something she had taken to doing recently, leaving him 30-second recordings that were usually a mix of observations about school, questions about dinner, and occasionally a fact she had encountered and could not keep to herself. That morning's message had ended with, "Dad, I looked up Richard Cole on the school computer during free reading. There were a lot of results. I didn't read them because I didn't know if I was allowed. But there were a lot." And then, in the same matter-of-fact tone, "I love you. Bye." He had been thinking about it ever since, about a 6-year-old conducting research with the same quiet focus she brought to her math worksheets, and about what it meant that she had found a lot of results. Because in Ethan's memory, Richard Cole had always moved in a world that left few public traces. Careful men usually did. So he was distracted when Victoria stepped through the side entrance, and the small sound he made, not quite a word, just the involuntary catch of breath that happens when something you weren't prepared for arrives, was enough. She stopped. The man and the general manager continued a few paces before realizing, and then stood at a polite distance with the studied nonchalance of people pretending not to notice something they were absolutely noticing. "I didn't know you'd be here today," Victoria said. "Thursdays," Ethan said. "Ethan. And Tuesdays. I'll remember that." He wasn't sure if she meant it as a warning or a promise. He wasn't sure she knew either. He looked at her for a moment. She looked back. The room was half demolished around them, exposed brick on the east wall, scaffolding along the ceiling, plastic sheeting over the original bar, and she stood in the middle of it in a cream blouse and dark trousers with the same composed stillness she had always carried. The kind that looked like confidence and Ethan had always suspected was more accurately described as discipline. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Her chin lifted slightly. "You can ask." "Richard Cole." He watched her face very carefully. "Did he have something to do with why you left?" She was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that the man at the edge of the room shifted his weight, and the general manager found something interesting to examine on her clipboard. "Yes," Victoria said. It was a single word. It landed with the weight of 6 years behind it. Ethan had told himself over many nights and in many versions of this imagined conversation that he would feel relief when he finally heard something that made sense. He had been wrong. What he felt was something closer to the sensation of a door opening onto a room you had been locked out of for so long that you'd stopped imagining what might be inside. "I need to know the rest of it," he said. "I know you do." Her voice was steady in that way that meant it was costing her something to keep it that way. "And I'm going to tell you, I can't do it here, like this." A glance at the 2 people behind her, patient and pretending otherwise. "But I'm going to tell you all of it." I should have told you 6 years ago and I didn't, and I have been wrong about that every day since. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid, she said. And because I was told something about you that I chose to believe instead of asking you directly. And because I was 28 years old, and the person telling me had been the most powerful figure in my life since I was 22. She paused. None of those are excuses. They're just the truth. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Luna has been asking questions, he said. She found your name eventually in a search that started with Richard Cole's. She's 6, and she has been trying to connect dots because she has decided that important sad things have reasons and she wants to understand the reason. Something moved across Victoria's face that was harder to name than pain. It was the particular expression of a person encountering for the first time the full shape of what they missed. She sounds like you, Victoria said quietly. She sounds like both of us, Ethan said. He went back to work. She went to her meeting. But at the end of the day, when he was packing up his drawings, he found a note tucked under the corner of his portfolio, a business card with her private cell written on the back, and underneath it, in her handwriting, "When you're ready. No pressure. I'll wait." He put it in his jacket pocket. He did not throw it away. At home that evening, Luna was at the kitchen table with her notebook open to a new page. She had written 3 names at the top, connected by lines she had drawn with a ruler. Richard Cole, Victoria Hartwell. And then, underneath both of them, connected to each by a single ruled line running to a circle in the center of the page. Dad plus us. Rachel was standing in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at his daughter. "Luna," he said carefully. "What is that?" "A map," she said without looking up. "Of the important sad thing. I'm still figuring out the connections." She looked up then, with those dark, serious eyes. "Is it okay that I'm figuring it out?" Ethan sat down beside her. He looked at the page for a long time. "Yeah, buddy," he said finally. "It's okay." He did not tell her about the note in his pocket. But he thought about it all night. The call from Frank Delgado came on a Wednesday morning in early November, 3 weeks after the conversation in the half-demolished dining room of the Aurelius, and it came with the specific quality of urgency that Frank reserved for things that required action before the end of the business day. "The SEC has issued a formal subpoena for Richard Cole," Frank said. "It went out yesterday. By this afternoon it will be public. I wanted you to hear it from me first." Victoria was standing at the window of the 44th floor. The phone pressed hard against her ear, watching a November rain move across the park far below. "Gerald," she said. It wasn't a question. "Gerald Marsh submitted a voluntary disclosure to the commission 6 weeks ago," Frank confirmed. 30 years of internal documentation, wire transfers, private correspondence, instructions for the fabrication of financial instruments, and, a pause, deliberate, records related to the production of documents used in a private coercive action against a third party approximately 6 years ago. The rain moved south across the park, gray and steady. "He kept records of it," Victoria said. "Richard had Gerald produce documents to use against Ethan, and Gerald kept records of being asked to do it." "Gerald Marsh is a meticulous man," Frank said. "Apparently his loyalty to Richard had limits. The crossing of those limits appears to have occurred somewhere around the time Richard instructed him to falsify evidence against a private individual who had committed no crime." Another pause. "He kept everything, Victoria. Every instruction, every draft, every message. It is, according to the lead prosecutor I spoke with this morning, one of the most complete paper trails they have ever seen in a white-collar case." Victoria closed her eyes. "What does this mean for me?" she asked. "You're a witness, not a target. Your voluntary cooperation over the past 3 weeks and the financial records you provided, your formal statement, the corroborating documentation, has been noted. The Commission's position, which Frank conveyed to me this morning with some clarity, is that you were a victim of the scheme, not a participant." He paused. "You should know that Richard Cole was contacted by his attorneys last night. By this evening, when the subpoena becomes public, there will be a great deal of noise." "I know. Are you all right?" She thought about how to answer that honestly. "I will be," she said. She hung up and stood at the window for a long time. Then she picked up her phone again and called the number on the back of the business card. Ethan answered on the third ring. She could hear, faintly in the background, the sounds of a construction site. Voices, something mechanical, the specific echo of a large space being worked on. "It's happening today," she said. "The SEC subpoena for Richard, it'll be public by tonight." A silence. "Okay," he said. His voice was careful. "I need to tell you everything. Not on the phone." She pressed her free hand flat against the glass. "I owe you the full truth in person. I have owed you that for 6 years." Another silence. Longer this time. She waited. "Tonight," he said. "After the girls are in bed. Rachel can stay." "Okay," she said. "Victoria." A pause. "I'm not going to make this easy for you." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to." She arrived at the address he texted her at 9 o'clock that evening. A brownstone on West 84th Street. 3 steps up from the sidewalk, a light on in the front window and a small potted plant beside the door that had, she noticed, been watered recently. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment before going up. Inside, it was warm and particular. The kind of home that has been arranged not for appearance but for living, where the furniture has been chosen for how it feels and the bookshelves hold things that have actually been read, and the kitchen smells faintly of whatever was cooked for dinner. She stood in the hallway while Ethan closed the door behind her, and she looked at the framed drawings on the wall, architectural sketches, some of them his, and beside them in crayon and marker, 2 drawings that could only have been made by children. A house with enormous windows labeled "Our House" in careful capitals, and beside it a figure with dark curly hair labeled "Dad," and 2 smaller figures labeled Lily and Luna. She looked at those drawings for a long time. They sat at the kitchen table. Rachel had made tea and then taken herself to the back of the apartment with the tactful efficiency that characterized everything she did. And the kitchen was quiet, except for the rain on the window and the occasional sound of the building settling around them. Victoria told him everything. She told him about the morning Richard arrived at her office, about the folder, the photographs, the fabricated transcripts, about the precision of the threat, not just her career but his freedom, weaponized against her, about the 24 hours she had spent in a hotel room, pregnant with his children, trying to find a way out that didn't exist, about signing the papers, about the 6 years she had spent telling herself it had been the only choice, until the night she saw his firm's website and realized, with a clarity she could no longer avoid, that the man she had been told was a danger to her had spent those same 6 years building a beautiful life for their daughters. She told him about Frank, about the metadata, about Gerald Marsh and 30 years of records and a paper trail so complete it had made a prosecutor pause. She told him about the dresses. Ethan listened to all of it without speaking. He sat with his hands around his mug and his eyes on the table, and he listened in the way he had always listened. Completely. Without rushing her toward the part he wanted to get to. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. "He threatened to have me arrested," Ethan said. Not a question. Processing it aloud. "Yes. And you believed it." "I believed it was possible. I believed he could make it happen whether or not it was true." She held his gaze. "I was 28. He had been running my life for 6 years and I had let him because I thought it was mentorship. By the time he used it against me, I didn't know how to see a way out." "You could have told me," Ethan said. "I know. You could have shown me the documents. We could have—" He stopped. Pressed his hand flat on the table. "We could have fought it." "I know," she said again. "I know that now. I didn't know it then, and I don't know if knowing it would have been enough. And I have lived with that question every day for 6 years." She paused. "I am not asking you to forgive me. I am not asking you for anything. I came because you deserve the truth and I should have given it to you a long time ago." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, a siren moved down the block and faded. The rain had slowed to something lighter, barely audible against the glass. "Luna figured it out," he said finally. "What?" "Not the details. But she drew a map. 3 names connected to a circle in the center that said Dad and us. She told me she was trying to understand the important sad thing." He exhaled. "She's 6 years old, and she knew there was a connection before I did. Victoria looked at the drawings on the wall, the house with enormous windows, the careful labeled figures. "She sounds extraordinary," Victoria said softly. "She is," Ethan said. "They both are." He looked at Victoria for a long moment. "They don't know about you. Not really. They know they have a mother. They haven't asked for more than that yet." "Yet," Victoria said. "Yet," he confirmed. The word sat between them with all its weight. At 11 o'clock, Ethan walked her to the door. On the front steps, in the light rain, she turned back. "For what it's worth," she said, "everything I felt was real. Every single part of it. What Richard took from us, from you, from the girls, from me. I want you to know it was real." "I know it was," he said. "That's the hardest part." She nodded once and walked down the steps. At the bottom, she stopped. "The Wall Street Journal is going to run the story tomorrow morning," she said, without turning around. "Richard Cole. Front page. I wanted you to hear it from me first." "Thank you," he said. She walked away into the rain. He stood on the steps and watched her go, and he felt something shift in him. Not healing exactly, but the particular sensation of a long-held question finally receiving its answer. It did not feel the way he had expected. It felt quieter than that, and heavier, and in some way he was not yet ready to examine, like the beginning of something rather than the end. He went inside. He checked on the girls. Luna was asleep with her notebook open beside her, a pencil still loosely held in one hand. The page it was open to showed the same map she had drawn before. 3 names. The lines, the circle, but now there was a 4th name added in the margin, connected to Victoria's by a careful arrow. The 4th name was Gerald. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at his daughter's sleeping face and the map on the page beside her, and he thought, "She is 6 years old and she found the thread." The Wall Street Journal published the story at 6:14 in the morning on a Thursday in November, and by 8 o'clock it had been picked up by every major financial outlet in the country. The headline was precise and devastating. Hartwell Industries. Chairman Richard Cole faces SEC fraud charges. Federal subpoena cites decades of offshore diversion. The photograph was the one that would be reprinted everywhere in the days that followed. Richard Cole in a charcoal suit, escorted by 2 federal agents through the entrance of his private club in Greenwich, his expression caught in the specific moment between composure and its collapse. His wife, Diane Cole, gave an interview to Vogue 3 days later. She had, she said, spent 31 years in a marriage defined by control and strategic cruelty, and she was giving the interview because silence had protected him long enough. The charges against Richard Cole were extensive. The SEC's case covered 11 years of offshore diversion. Funds moved through a network of shell entities that bore no trace back to Hartwell Industries in any public filing, but that Gerald Marsh's records connected to Richard with a directness that left no interpretive room. The total was eventually assessed at just under $2 billion. His personal fortune, accumulated and insulated over decades, was frozen within 72 hours of the subpoena's publication. He was also charged in a separate civil action, with coercion and defamation in connection with the fabricated documents used against Ethan 6 years prior. Frank Delgado had filed that action on Victoria's instruction, and she had stood behind it completely, appearing in deposition providing every record, naming every detail. It was the most difficult thing she had done in 35 years, and it was also, she understood, the most necessary. Ethan was not in the courtroom for any of it. He had given his own deposition, 2 hours with a federal attorney on a gray morning in Frank Delgado's conference room, and then he had gone back to his life, because that was what he had built, and it was worth going back to. The Aurelius renovation finished 6 days ahead of schedule in January. The owners held a small private dinner for the team, and Ethan stood in the completed space, the original plasterwork restored and lit with the warmth it had always deserved, the brass fixtures polished, the bar a masterwork of recovered oak and new marble, and felt the particular satisfaction of work done right. Victoria was not at the dinner. She sent a note to the owners and a separate, brief message to Ethan that said only, "It's extraordinary. You gave it back to itself. Thank you." He read it twice and put his phone in his pocket. In February, Lily and Luna turned 7. They were different at 7 than they had been at 6. Lily somehow even louder, more irrepressible, a force of nature who had joined the school's theater program and come home every afternoon, with residual drama still attached to her. Luna was reading at a level that had prompted a meeting with her teacher, who used the word exceptional twice and then, looking at Ethan's face, said, "She's going to need more. Whatever more looks like for her, she needs it." The birthday morning began as it always did. Pancakes, the tradition Rachel had started and that had become non-negotiable, with whatever shapes the girls requested. Lily requested dinosaurs. Luna requested a circle with lines coming out of it that she specified was a sun, but that Ethan privately thought looked more like a diagram. The box arrived at 11:15. No return address. 2 dresses folded in tissue paper. Tissue. One pink, shot through with gold thread that caught the light. One yellow, the exact particular yellow of a warm kitchen on a winter morning. Both of them perfectly sized. And that was the part that stopped Ethan for a moment, standing at the front door with the box in his hands. She had gotten the sizes right, which meant she had been paying attention, tracking them, knowing them from the outside, from photographs, from whatever fragments a mother at a distance could gather. And that knowledge had translated into 2 dresses that fit 2 girls she had never once held. Lily held hers up immediately. "It's so fancy," she announced. "I'm going to wear it to school on Monday." Luna held hers more carefully, the way she held most things. She turned it over, examined the stitching, then looked at the box. Then she looked at her father with those dark, reading eyes. "It's from Mom," she said. Not a question. Ethan held her gaze. "I think so," he said. Luna looked at the dress for another moment. Then she folded it carefully along its original lines and set it on the table beside her notebook. "I'm going to write her a letter," she said. "Okay," Ethan said. "Is that allowed?" "Yes," he said. "That's allowed." He called Victoria that evening. She answered on the first ring, which told him she had been waiting. "The dresses arrived," he said. "I know." A pause. "I didn't know if I should keep sending them. I wasn't sure if it was—" "Luna wants to write you a letter." Silence. "Ethan, I'm not telling you this to give you hope about something I can't promise," he said carefully. "I'm telling you because she's 7 years old and she made that decision herself and I'm not going to stand in the way of her making it." He paused. "Whatever comes next, it comes from her. Not from me trying to build something I'm not ready for." "I understand," Victoria said. Her voice was very quiet. "She figured out it was you, by the way, from the dress." One look at the box and she knew. A sound on the other end that might have been a breath or might have been something else. "Of course she did," Victoria said. "She figured out Gerald Marsh before the SEC had a public case." "She did," Ethan said. And despite everything, despite the 6 years and the weight of all of it, he heard himself almost smile. "She's something else, Victoria." "She is," Victoria said. "They both are." They were quiet for a moment. Not the silence of things unsaid, but the silence of 2 people who had finally said the things that needed saying and were now sitting with what remained after that. "I'm not ready," Ethan said, "for whatever you might be hoping for. I need you to hear that." "I hear it. But I'm not. I don't hate you. I haven't for a long time, if I'm honest. I was angry. I was lost for a while. But I built my way out of it, and I'm not going to unmake what I built just because now I know there was a reason." He exhaled. "What I know is this. Those girls deserve a mother who shows up. Not from a distance. Not through dresses with no name on the box. If you want to be in their lives, it has to be real, and it has to be present, and it has to be earned." "I know that," Victoria said. "I'm prepared to earn it." "Then start with the letter," he said. He hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment. Through the window, the February night was cold and clear, the kind of clear that only happens in winter, when the city sheds its haze and the sky goes deep and honest. He thought about a ring bought with 4 months of savings. He thought about yellow paint on an ear. He thought about a note slipped under his portfolio on a half-demolished floor. and two girls who had his eyes and her cheekbones and the stubborn particular beauty of people who have been loved well, even when the circumstances were imperfect. In the spring, Hartwell Industries launched a new initiative under Victoria's direct leadership, a foundation, endowed with 40% of her personal shares in the company, dedicated to providing legal, financial, and professional support to single parents navigating custody, poverty, and institutional barriers. It was named in the plural, quietly, the Lily and Luna Foundation. The press release did not explain the name. Victoria did not comment when asked. The gift was not a trade. It was not an apology, not exactly. It was the most honest accounting she could make of the cost of her cowardice, paid forward to people who were living inside versions of the difficulty she had caused. Ethan saw the announcement the morning it published. He sat with his coffee and read it twice. He did not call her. He did not need to. Some things communicate clearly enough without words. In April, Luna's letter was finished. She had been working on it since February, adding lines, crossing them out, asking Ethan occasionally how to spell a word and then declining to tell him what the word was for. The final version was 2 pages front and back, in her careful, deliberate handwriting with a drawing at the bottom of 3 figures standing in front of a brownstone with big windows, labeled, in her precise hand, "Our house. You can visit." Ethan sealed the envelope and sent it to Victoria's office. 3 weeks later, a reply arrived. 2 pages in handwriting that was careful in a different way, the handwriting of someone who had written and rewritten and finally committed to the words on the page. He left it on the kitchen table without reading it. Luna read it at breakfast. She read it twice. Whoa. Folded it precisely and placed it in her notebook between 2 pages she did not show him. She looked up at him across the table. She cried when she wrote it, Luna said. You can tell from some of the letters. Yeah? Ethan said. Yeah. Luna picked up her fork. That's okay. Important things are supposed to be hard. He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and his stubborn need to understand the world. And he thought about everything it had taken to get to this kitchen table, this morning, this ordinary, extraordinary moment of a child eating breakfast and being entirely, completely herself. I forgive you, Victoria, he had said. On the night she came to the brownstone after everything, after the story and the silence and the rain on the window. But my girls have a home, and I built it without you. It had been true then. It was still true. But home, he was learning, was not a thing with fixed walls. It was the thing you kept building, room by room, choice by choice, day by day, for the people who mattered most. And sometimes, if you were careful and honest and braver than you thought you were, it turned out there was more room than you had planned for. Lily got a dog in May. She named him Biscuit, because the name was, in her words, perfect and also delicious sounding. He was a golden retriever puppy with enormous paws and a talent for stealing socks, and he immediately became the most beloved presence in the apartment, rivaled only by Rachel and pancakes and the Saturday afternoon tradition of watching movies on the couch in a configuration that left no room for anyone to move, but that everyone agreed was the correct and only way to watch a movie. Luna kept her notebooks. She filled 3 more that year. Observations, questions, maps of connections she was tracing through the world with her particular patient intensity. On the first page of the new one she started in September, she wrote, in her most careful letters, "Important sad things have reasons. And sometimes, if you follow the reasons all the way to the end, they stop being sad." Ethan found it on the coffee table one evening while the girls were asleep, and he sat with it in the lamplight for a long time. Then he set it back exactly where he had found it, turned off the light and went to bed in the home he had built, imperfect and real and entirely his, and slept better than he had in years.